Et maintenant, j'aimerais inviter Madame Sylvie.
Ms. Sylvie Berube, you have 7 minutes. The floor is yours. First of all, I would like sincerely to thank all witnesses here today for having shared your stories. You are courageous, resilient, and in particular, determined. You believe in your country and you're courageous in that you have been through tremendous psychological and physical trauma. We're here to hear you today because everything you're saying is very valuable to our study. My question is to Mr. Chaboy. I hope I pronounced your name properly. We know that parental consent in sending children to camps in areas controlled by Russia has been discussed quite a bit with witnesses. We know the way in which Russian authorities obtain consent is somewhat nebulous. My question to you is this. Can we say that the authorities never did obtain your consent?
Hello, thank you for this question. Of course not. Nobody asked me anything. I was just told, find someone to take care of your children while you are here being interrogated. And I put my children on the bus. I did not know anything about them for the entire 45 days that I was in Olenivka. And it was just at the end of May that I learned some news about my children.
They were
violence de la part des autorités et de l'armée russe. Donc, pouvez-vous expliquer davantage la situation que vous avez vécue parce que c'est très important. On sait qu'il y a beaucoup de gens chez vous qui ont vécu de la violence et on voulait avoir davantage d'explications.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I really understood the question. What kind of information are you looking for? Thank you.
Your children were taken from you, and you were subjected to physical violence by the Russian authorities. Please tell us more. Describe that to us, please.
Well, first of all, these are constant interrogations, lack of fresh air in cells. The cells were overflowing. In Donetsk detention center, we were 55 or so. There was no air left to breathe. We were basically lying under the door to try to breathe. There was no water, not enough water. We had 2 loaves of bread for all of us and 1.5 liters of water for all of us for 24 hours. We slept on the floor. It was very hot. It was intolerable. And when we were taken to Olenivka, it was pretty much the same. They would give us dirty water from time to time. The food was disgusting. Fish mixed into some kind of porridge. The dishes were dirty. We mainly ate bread. There were no hygiene conditions. In order to use the bathroom, we had to use our own clothing. There were a lot of us in the cell. In a 6 people cell, we were 55. Then when they brought women from Azovstal, we were transferred to the 2nd floor, and then in a 1-person cell, we were 28. We were put to labor. We had to dig in gardens. We were painting, clearing grass, etc. Basically, making repairs in the jail number 120 in Olenivka.
Parents are forced to allow their children to go to Russian-controlled zones.
you cannot accept this. You have to fight for your children. You have to use every possible way to get your children back, grasp at any opportunity, any straw, because when I knew I had only 5 days to get my children back, I felt desperate, and I knew that any mistake on my part could deprive me of my children, and I was like a robot. I didn't sleep. I didn't want to do anything else. I had to get my children back, and in 2 days I managed to do so. You cannot give up. There are good people out there who will help. There are so many volunteers out there helping in different situations. You cannot stay silent. You have to call for help and move ahead and get your children back regardless of anything.
The families of these children have to deal with the dangers of armed conflict. It seems that parents are consenting in an effort to try to protect their children and so that their children will have food. Is that correct?
Indeed, they deceive parents to get their children. They say your children will be safe, just send them away. I've heard about that too, but I know it's a one-way ticket.
In many cases, would you say that the consent given by parents is genuine consent, or is it simply what they feel will be a safer place for their children, to be a safer outcome for their children?
I think maybe yes. That's probably at some point the best choice the parents can make, but I was not provided a choice. For example, I was torn away from my children, and while I was in jail, I nearly went crazy thinking about where my children are, what happened to them. I couldn't stop thinking about that. I knew nothing about my children, and my only thought was, how do I get my children back?
Madam Rashveska would like to add something in answering your question, Madam Belubi. Go ahead, Madam. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. I would like just to add some details to the case of Mr. Mejevey, because his 3 children were unlawfully deported together with other children from Mariupol, firstly to occupied Donetsk and then to the sanatorium Polany in Moscow region. And then these children, the so-called group of 31, some of them were directly transferred.
Excuse me, there is no traduction. I would like to ask you to repeat when the traduction is on, please. Yeah.
Okay. So the 3 children of Mr. Mejevey were not only one who were accompanied in the
Phone, s'il vous plaît. Can you lift your micro a little bit, please? Lift it up, please. Little.
It's better? No? Yes?
Yes.
So
Keep going,
continue,
please.
Yeah? So 3 children of Mr. Mejevey were unlawfully deported from Donetsk to the sanatorium Polany in Moscow region, together with other children from Mariupol. And some of these children were then transferred to Russian foster families for foster care. Some of them were transferred to...
Just a moment, please. We do have problem with the traduction. Yes.
The interpreters regret that sound is not sufficient to provide interpretation. It's not a question of lifting. It's not a question of lifting the microphone, unfortunately. It is the quality of the sound and the signal. They are insufficient.
And now, it's better or no?
Unfortunately, our interpreter. They cannot do the traduction for you, so please, I'm sorry. I would like to ask you not to continue. We have no interpretation.
Chair, just a
Yes.
point of order. Maybe we can advise the witnesses that if it's very unfortunate this has happened, but they can send written responses to questions, and we will very much read and reflect on written follow-ups sent by all the witnesses as well.
A great idea. I believe you could send a written response to the committee, and we will welcome that.
Monsieur, est-ce que je peux
May I answer in French? It's going to be, unfortunately, it's the same sound, regretfully.
So please send it in writing, if you don't mind, please.
Just a suggestion, if she speaks Ukrainian, the Ukrainian interpreter's audio seemed to be acceptable. So perhaps she could speak in Ukrainian and let the interpreter.
Can you please try to speak in Ukrainian, and we would like to see how it goes, please. Can you?
Зараз мене чутно чи ні?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Так, продовжуйте, будь ласка. So, here's what I wanted to say. Mr. Mezhevoy's 3 children were deported to Polyane in Moscow region together with other children. We call them the Group of 31. And among those children, there were some who were first fostered in Russian families, and others were fostered in Russian orphanages. And Philip Holovnya was there, who was in care of Maria Lvova Belova, and Bogdan Yarmokhin, a boy who recently received a draft notice to join the Russian army. And once he's 18, and November 19th of this year, he will have to go to the Russian military office, and it's very likely that he'll be sent to the battlefield in Ukraine. I want to say that Bogdan has a sister in Ukraine who has all the documents to get him back home. But at the same time, Bogdan tried to cross the Russian border, where he was detained and at the personal order of Maria Lvova Belova by Russian FSB. And so we are fighting for these 2 weeks before Bogdan turns 18 in order to prevent him from drafting him into the army, violating all the rules of the international law. And we are working on getting other children back who are also about to turn 18. Thank you.
Now I would like to invite Madame McPherson to take the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also would like to express my gratitude to all of the witnesses, particularly the children who have shared their stories. This is harrowing testimony for us all to hear. Like many in this room, I'm also a mother. I listen to the testimony of Ms. Bodak and just think my son is 16, and I can't even imagine the horror that you've had to endure, to hear that they put a hood over your head. And yeah, and I'm also so impressed with how strong your testimony is, that you're able to come here and that you're able to share your thoughts and your stories with us. But I am also trying to understand how it is that the children on this call were able to get back to Ukraine, and so many of the Ukrainian children who have been taken have not been able to return. And I think what I'll do is I would start with the parents. If I could ask you, Ms. Bodak, to begin. You know, from your perspective, I know how hard you fought to have Vladislav returned to you, but what are those things that we can assist with? How did that happen? Was it luck? Was it hard work? Was it a combination of all the things being aligned? I would just like to hear your perspective on that.
I had no idea how to get him home until I received information that there is an organization, Save Ukraine, and this organization helps to bring back Ukrainian children. And I contacted them, and I worked with them. So when I was on my way, I was working with Save Ukraine, and they were with me from the beginning to the end. Because prior to that, I had no idea how I was going to be able to bring my son back. So basically, someone who already worked with them before recommended me to talk to them, to work with them. So now when I know about similar situations, I always provide the number of this organization, Save Ukraine, and I recommend them to get in touch with them and work with them. Пане Мозовий, а ваша є думка яка? Межевий. Thank you for your question. We cannot let you know how are we doing this on the territory of Belarus or Russia. It's a confidential information. It has to do with a high degree of risk for those people who help us to rescue these children. But please know one thing. Russians are doing everything in their power to prevent these children from returning back to Ukraine. Parents or people who have parental rights, they have to go through interrogations, through lie detector. They ask to provide DNA samples. All of such cases are controlled personally by Madame Belova. And what Ms. Belova was saying for Group of 31 about Philip who tried to escape, Russians understand very clearly that all these children are witnesses of war crimes. So it's easier for them to send these children to Russian army, so to be killed on the battlefield, or prevent them from living in other ways, because they know that these children have a lot of information that they can share, and that their stories, it's a story of war crimes. So all Ukrainian children that are there now, they're being threatened, they're being scared, they were given all kinds of motivations to stay in Russia. They provided untrue information that it's dangerous for them to go back to Ukraine. There is one boy who is 14 years old now. He was 13 when he ended up on occupied territory, then in Russia, then back to occupied territory. He was given a birth certificate. He didn't want to take it. He turned it, and for that, Russian birth certificate. For that action, he was persecuted. He was issued a new Russian birth certificate, but he was not given. It was in his file. When he was 14 years old, he was forced to receive a Russian passport. He didn't want to receive a Russian passport, but when a legal representative came to pick him up, they would not allow to take him and bring back to Ukraine. I cannot tell you specifically what steps we took to bring him back to Ukraine, but it's a very complicated and difficult enterprise and a very risky one.
Anything you'd like to add? I see your hand is up.
Да, я хотел добавить.
Yes, to add to Katerina Rashevsky's about Group 31, I have this list of people. This is the list of list of all those children who were stolen by Russian authority. And in this list, it includes my children, and Bogdan Yerokhin, Ifilip Golovnya, and all other children. When I arrived at Latvia, my child had a Russian ID card, and one of his friends, I cannot tell his family name, and he told him that 3 days after we left from the camp all the children there, they were placed in foster families in Moscow. And he was also in a foster family. And my son asked him, how do you like it there? And he told him, what can I do? I have nowhere to go back. My house was destroyed. Here, at least, I have a place to stay. That was the response of that boy. That's all I can add.
7 minutes.
And I would like to go to the second round, and I would like to invite Madame Pamov to take the floor for 5 minutes. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry to
No.
mix
It's
up your
Dumov,
name.
but it happens.
Dumov.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, and in particular, the young people who have come to share their stories. I can't imagine how re-traumatizing it is for you to share your stories, but know how important it has been for us to hear you and for Canadians to hear your voice here in Canada. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for your bravery. I wanted to talk a little bit about mental health, and if it's too difficult for the young people testifying to talk about this, I'm happy for the others to talk about it. But research has shown that the younger the age of people who are taken into situations like this, the harder the psychological consequences are. And I think all of you talked about support that you're getting since you've been back in Ukraine. But I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about what's needed and how we in Canada can support the difficult transition to coming back home, because the psychological abuse you've lived through while in Russia won't go away just because you crossed the border. So I wonder, whoever would like to take that question, it's open to anyone. Oh, thank you.
Дозвольте мені.
If I may, I can begin, and as I speak, maybe our children present here will think whether they would like to add something. You're absolutely right. Everything depends on the age of a child and how long they spent on occupied territories or in Russia. It depends on particular circumstances, how they were deported, how they were transferred. There were cases when military would dress them up, when military Russian personnel would use the threat of weaponry. They would place them in their military vehicle and would remove them from Ukrainian territory to Russia. So obviously, there could be all kinds of trauma related to that. Among those 200 people that we rescued, they all have stories, different stories. And the first thing that every one of them needs, whether it's in Canada or in Ukraine, is safety.
Permanency, безпека,
and permanency. These are the main things that are required by children. That's why we created open healing centers, so that these children can go through a 6-month program of rehabilitation. They live there, they are fed there, we clothe them, they are able to study with Ukrainian curriculum. There is a psychological person on staff, and all kinds of services are present there that would allow these children to rejuvenate their life. And we are doing all this, as you can understand, during the war that's ongoing on. So we're not only bringing them back, we're also rehabilitating them and reintegrating them back into the society. So, and now I would like to ask, maybe our children can share their ideas. I would like to add that it depends, of course, on age. and how a child, what's their attitude to Ukraine and how they love Ukraine. I spent 9 months on the territory of Russia, and I had a specific attitude, and no matter what they did, I didn't want to abandon Ukraine. I didn't want to receive Russian citizenship, even though they would told me, you don't have parents, it would be better for you to assimilate, to adapt, but I was refusing it outright. But I know that my brother, he was 12 years old. He was more susceptible to psychological pressure that was placed on him. We were all in different foster families, and he remembers that that in Ukraine there were Russians and there were shellings, bombings, and in Russia it was a peaceful environment. So for him, I was older, so for me, I understood that it was that it impacted him, and I realized even then that maybe he will not be coming back because there will be all kinds of barriers on his coming back. But even if Russians, if it's parents, if they do want to bring their child back, or it's a sister or brother, if they know about that there is a family back in Ukraine, they even place a bigger psychological pressure so that to prevent them from thinking about going back to Ukraine.
And now I would like to invite Mr. Guinness to take the floor for 5 minutes, please. What happened? The floor is yours, Mr. Guinness.
Thank you, Chair. I want to join others in saluting the heroism and the resilience of our witnesses. Of course, I think for all of us, these stories make us think of our own families and our own children, and how horrible it must be to be in these situations. I think also of my grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor, who spent part of the war separated from her family, hiding, and the promise we made at the end of that war to her generation, the promise of never again, and how we have failed to deliver on that promise, that we are again hearing testimony of what is clearly genocide, that is planned and perpetrated from the highest levels of the Putin regime, including Vladimir Putin himself, directly involved in this. I want to focus my questions on hearing more in terms of first-person testimony, but I do want to invite the NGOs represented to respond in writing to this initial question, which is just about further individuals who should be sanctioned for their involvement in these crimes, further international legal processes that you think should be convened, and against which individuals. These are concrete proposals our committee can make, so I'd appreciate you following up in writing on those points. I'd like to ask the young people here if you could specifically share with us about efforts that those who were controlling you used to force you into propaganda activities. Were you forced to do certain things that you understood would be used as Russian propaganda? Were you filmed? And would people, would other children sometimes try not to participate in those activities, and what would happen to them if they sought to refuse to participate in those activities?
Anyone could take the question, please?
Пояснити дітям.
I will try to explain to the children. If you know any crimes that Russia committed, or propaganda or pressure, if you could share, what do you think the legal methods that were applied to you, the wrong things that the Russians did to you? You can tell about that here. There was a teacher. She worked at the camp. So she beat the children. For example, she beat me because I left the territory of the camp just for a little bit. Another boy was beaten because she thought he stole her things, even though that was not the case. And she had no proof of that. There's no sound.
Добрий день, мене звати.
Hello, my name is Vladislav. We had a situation in the camp. My friend, who was also pro-Ukrainian, and Astahov, the chief of the camp, said something to him, but he wouldn't listen. He continued to have his pro-Ukrainian position. And we were in our room, and then after that, Astahov, he understood that he can't do anything to us, but there are other children our age, but they could beat us up, yell at us, gang up against us. And so he told them that we were pro-Ukrainian, and then in the evening, 8 guys came in, and they started to beat my friend, kick him in the head, and I said to them, hey guys, that's no way to solve the issue, let's talk. But they still beat him up, and the next day we were sent to the isolation room, the punishment room, and we spent 2 days there. Now allow me to add that Vladislav is talking about Astahov, who was basically the director of the camp. After Crimea was annexed, or during the annexation, he was in a special unit of the police, the riot police, Berkut. And after Crimea was annexed, he started to collaborate and work for Russia. And that's the camp where he was committing all these crimes against children. He was intimidating them. It was basically torture. He kept them locked up, deprived them of food and water. He used different forms of punishment against the children. The things children tell, that very rarely anyone, after a personal conversation with him, almost all children would agree to take on the Russian citizenship and accepted all the conditions. That's why Vladislav is a hero for me, because he did not betray his ideas, and he consistently kept his Ukrainian identity and withstood the pressures and trials, attempts to make him into a Russian child. But I also understand how hard it was for other children, because it was easier for them to give in, give up, and accept all the conditions, from taking on the Russian citizenship to everything else. Very often, those children who did not agree, these children could be committed to a mental ward. They could keep them heavily medicated with special medication, and Denis could probably add a few words about himself if he so chooses. Thank you.
Ms. Hervoy, please, you could take the floor and you could add whatever you want to add to this question.
Indeed, I would like to compliment and tell you about my children being in the Russian Federation in Polyane camp. First of all, children were made to attend discotheques. So that's for children who are, after the war, are afraid of loud noises. They were shown movies about the war, about Cruella, who made dogs into a fur coat, basically traumatizing the children. They were made to attend the movie theaters, these discotheques, and as the young person here mentioned, there were children who were ready to intimidate those who maintained the pro-Ukrainian position. So these were older boys who would come in and say, "You are wrong to say this. Do not do this." So they were in charge of the younger children who were in the camp, and they intimidated, pressured them, and they were sort of watchmen. That's what happened in that camp. And additionally, children underwent a thorough medical examination. We don't know why, but my 5-year-old child was had to give blood for syphilis. I'm not even sure why. And additionally, they would give them some green pills. Nobody knows what those pills were, saying that these are vitamins. And nobody even knew what these pills were. Thank you.
Have 3 witnesses ask, they raise their hand to speak. What do you think? Give them, or we ask Mr. McPherson, and after I let them go and take the... Okay. Please, Mr. Denis Berezny, you have the floor for a few minutes.
I can tell you about a situation that happened. There was a child in the camp who did not listen to the camp leaders, and that child was sent to a psychiatric ward because they thought that that child is mentally ill. The child didn't sleep, didn't eat, and so they were committed to a mental ward. Thank you.
Maintenant, Mr. Rudenko, please. You could take the floor.
Thank you. This is what I'd like to add. When I was in my punishment cell, in isolation, they would give me 8 pills, and they were saying, "You have to take these or else we send you to a mental hospital." And I would say, "No, I don't know what these are. I'm not going to take them." And then they took everything from me. I had a tiny room, 2 by 3 meters, with a small window, and I had to stay there, and I thought I would really go crazy. Thank you.
Mrs. Motishak, please. Could take the floor.
I would like to add that police was called on us because we were misbehaving, or rather we were showing that we were from Ukraine. One time, girls put a blue and yellow balloon up, and they came into our room. They popped the balloon, and then they took us to the police station, took down our information, and said if we ever do anything like this again, then we will be sent to the police again, and the police would decide what to do with us. Thank you.
Madame Rashevska, to take the floor, please.
Can you hear me? I will speak Ukrainian. So here's a story I'd like to share. Alexander Ursul, a boy who was taken by Russia for the so-called treatment, medical treatment. He was wounded by a Russian missile during the Mariupol bombing. There is a story about him in Kyiv Independent. The boy did not receive the medical treatment that he really needed. He had to be treated again in Georgia first and then in Germany. And Georgian doctors say that the boy was prescribed a certain diet which led to a lot of weight loss for this child, and his health and his very life was endangered due to that diet. So some children are given these pills, and others are not provided medical treatment, and that's how they justify the reasons for deportation. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Now I would like to ask Madame Bérubé. Oui, j'aimerais inviter Madame Bérubé à prendre.
Ms. Bérubé, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's very difficult to hear everything you're saying. When we hear about what children have lived through, what families have gone through, that children were torn from their families, this is completely inhuman. But you are incredibly courageous and absolutely incredibly determined. You are a real example to us, and you are all heroes to me today. My question is to Ms. Bodak. I know that you've had to face some very difficult obstacles to bring your son back home. Could you please tell us what you had to go through and what obstacles you had to overcome so that your son could come back home?
The difficulties arose at the borders, the Belarus border, for example, where I was interrogated for 2 hours. Why am I going to Russia? For what reason? They had all sorts of questions for me. Then Domodedovo in Russia. It's an airport in Moscow. It was very difficult there too, but I managed to get through quickly. I spent maybe an hour and a half there, maybe even less, before being admitted into Russia. Then I think the most difficult point was Lazurne, the village where I was held for 5 days. For 24 hours, I had the lie detector and the cellar. And then when we were let go with my son, that was the scariest part, because they did not want to let us go. They didn't want to let us out of Russia. We tried several checkpoints and failed. Then volunteers asked us to lay low for about a day and a half so nobody would know where we are. And then they told us when the car would be coming for us and that car would take us to the border. Indeed, a car came. My son and I went in the car to Pskov, to Smolensk region. And that was where we were able to cross over to Latvia. They let us through. But before that, from 2 p.m. to 6 a.m., we had to stand there at the border, and we were extremely cold because they didn't want to let us through. And then at 6 a.m., they let us through. And then at 9 a.m., when the guards changed, that's where we were able to arrive at the Latvian checkpoint. And that's where we had no more problems when Latvia let us in. All they asked, where are you from and where are you going to? And I said, I got my son from Russia and I'm taking him home to Ukraine, and we had no more problems. They just wished us happy travels. In Poland, I also had no issues, even though my son had no foreign travel document. He had an internal passport. The scariest part was Russia, because Russia did not want to let us out. They maybe didn't want to let my son out because he knew too much. I just don't know.
Eu peur à votre vie aussi.
It was difficult for you to go get your son, but my question is on your son, Vladislav. If he's comfortable answering, he can answer too. Did you see any psychological and physical changes with your son once you returned home? once you were reunited, did you see changes that might lead you to believe that he was abused by Russian authorities or by others?
Річ у тім, що зміни
The changes have taken place when he went there. He was 16 years old. He was still very like a child, but when I was removing him from there, it was like an adult. He was looking at me. It was my son, but it was aside from as a more mature person who has suffered a lot, who's gone through many things. He changed a lot, significantly, after 8 months that we were apart.
And
Thank you, Ms. Berube.
invite Madame Macpherson to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you to everyone for the testimony today. This has been very, very powerful for us. And I would like to end by asking the children some questions, if I could, the young people. I want to get a better sense of who was with you. So can you, I guess I'll ask a few questions and then whoever would like to respond can. First of all, I'd like to know how old the children were. Like, what was the youngest child that you saw that was in these camps or that was taken? Did you know any of the children when you were taken? Did you know any other of the children? Obviously, we know that Karina had her brother, and when you were rescued, when you were brought away from there, did those other children, were they forced to remain there? And I guess finally, just if you could tell us how you're feeling now, how you're feeling about your situation now, and what the future looks like for you now. Speak.
Yeah, they are discussing now, and maybe
I think
we
it's the
can
translation too.
Clarify this question and one by one. For example, first of all, хто був самим молодшим, якого
Who was the youngest child that you witnessed, sir?
Want to respond? That's if they don't feel that's okay as well.
Якщо ви не хочете відповідати, можете не відповідати, але
If you don't want to respond, you don't have to. But okay, we have someone who will respond. At our camp, we had a team for young children, 6 to 8 years old. And some of them were crying all the time. They wanted to see their mothers, but they were told, no, we are not able to send you. You have to stay here. And Astachov told us that you'll spend here 3 years, 5 years. That's all that I know. The youngest children that I remember, they were at the camp, girls. One girl was 7 years old, another one was about 10 years old. And they were told that their parents were supposed to come. And they told to their teacher, and the teacher told them, if your parents do not come to collect you, then you'll be transferred to orphanage or you'll continue to study. Maybe could you please maybe formulate your question again? What specific question you would like to hear the answer to?
To give the children an opportunity to share more with us, and I'd like to know a little bit more about the camps and a little bit more about how they're doing today. But But I think their answers have been wonderful so far, so that's sufficient. I do know that Mr. Mezcavja would also like to speak, or he had his hand up.
At our camp that was named Polyana, and there is a group of 31. The youngest was my daughter. He was born in 2015. Also, there were two children, Alexei Ishuk, born in 2014, and Diazan Eskis, 2014, date of birth. So these were the youngest from that camp, from that list that I have on my hands. Thank you. Also, I would like to add that we were bringing children back home from different camps, and it's the most difficult is to return young people, because those who are 12 years old, maybe somehow they're able to use social media to let know relatives where they are, but younger children, they don't have this ability. And the children will attest to that never workers, adults who work in those facilities, they never, ever helped children to connect children with their parents, to try to help them find their parents, to inquire whether the parents would like to reunite with their children. Not in a single camp we found evidence of that. They were making everything possible to make sure that these people never go back to Ukraine.
Please.
Я хотела бы добавить о том, что
I would like to add that at the camp, I didn't feel very well. It was a very hard circumstances. There was a psychological pressure. And every time when I recall those days, I don't feel well. And I would never wish on anyone to be in my place at that camp. Also, I would like to add to what Mykola said, that when I look at my children, they were tried to convince them that your father will not be able to collect you. Your father will not be able to reach you in such a short time. You have to make a decision. You should accept the offer of being placed into a foster family or to a specialized educational facility. The list that I have of 31 people, they made sure that they would not cross paths with other children. They were kind of isolated. They were there on a special program, isolated, so they do not intersect with other children who were at the same camp. Because there were other children there as well. But they prevented them to communicate, and they were all able only to see and maybe to talk to each other through an open window, including that's what happened with my older son as well. Thank you. And I know one other situation from the camp. Teachers and the director, they brought a girl to attempted suicide of one girl. So she cut her wrist and she was transferred to a hospital. And she spent there 2 weeks at the hospital. Thank you.
And that's put an end to our committee due that the time is almost over. On behalf of all members of the committee and the staff, we would like to thank all our witnesses for their presence. Your presence is so important to this committee. Your testimony really touched our hearts deeply. If you feel that you have some other information to share with the committee, you could send it in writing. Thank you and have a great day. And now I would like to have a few minutes to discuss the project, our traveling project. I believe you have received a draft for two proposals, one to travel to New York and one to travel to Toronto. Is the will of the committee to adopt both projects? Yes. McPherson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, honestly, I looked at both of the proposals. I think the one going to New York is very interesting. I think that it would be, I would be very supportive of that proposal.
Point of order, Chair. Point of, sorry, I think we're supposed to be in camera to talk about travel. Is that right?
Yes, the problem is, as the clerk told me, it takes a few minutes, and due to the time is over, we
Okay.
decided to do it.
Okay.
If you insist, we could take more time if the will of the committee accept that, and we'll turn to camera. Okay. You have to go. Yes, please.
I might suggest rather than discussing it here, like there are a lot of other steps that the proposals have to go through. So if we adopt both proposals, I think the inclination was a prioritization of the New York proposal, but that we can, you know, every party has tools to stop it later on if they wish. But
No, but I believe we have no unanimity, so the
we don't have
both
time for the
projects.
next meeting. Our
There's a consensus, and we do
Okay,
not have
we have no
consensus.
consensus about it, so we forgot about it. Thank you. C'est fait, je parlais. Okay. Yes, vous avez reçu plutôt aussi.
Earlier, you received a draft work plan.
I think we want Mike here for the work plan.
Okay, okay. Thank you. So the meeting is over.